You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
I think if we look at it from just an individual keeping their data private, and by their data, because we need to talk about this more in a moment, I really mean, what they're saying to people, what they're sharing. I think it's within reach. I think the vast majority of people, or if they're already doing texting, they can use a messaging app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben discusses the UK implementing a new strict online safety law. I've got the story of a surveillance success for law enforcement in Baltimore and a new to-me forensics tool. And later in the show, David Weissman, Vice President of Secure Communications at BlackBerry, is here to discuss making CISA's encrypted communications guidelines actionable. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. Tired of investigation tools that only do one thing at a time? Spending more time juggling contracts with data vendors than actually investigating? Maltego changes that for good. Get one investigation platform, one bill to pay, and all the data you need in one place. It comes with curated data and a full suite of tools to handle any digital investigation. Connect the dots so fast, cybercriminals won't even have time to Google what Maltego is. See the platform in action at maltego.com. All right. Well, lots to cover here today. Ben, you want to start things off for us?
Sure. So as we're recording, yesterday was St. Patrick's Day.
Right.
Across the, the English Sea?
The pond.
The pond, yeah. I was going to say between Ireland and England.
That pond. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I was going for a transition there that I just completely botched.
Sorry,
but
and I hijacked it. My apologies.
No, you're all good. In the United Kingdom, a new online safety law went into effect. It is called the Online Safety Act. It forces big tech companies to detect and remove dangerous online content. The penalties are very significant if they fail to comply. So fines of up to 10% of global profits. And in extreme cases, the UK government reserves the right to ban that platform within its jurisdiction if there has been a particularly egregious violation. So what is prohibited under the Online Safety Act? Things you would normally think about that are illegal, both here and abroad. Support for terrorism, child sexual exploitation, human trafficking, illegal drugs. But then there are things like animal welfare, abuse of animals that might violate the terms of service of some of our online platforms, but it's not necessarily one of the things that always gets taken down. And then there's some more legally gray areas. Extreme pornography, and it's kind of hard to define what that is. Right. I know. We know it when we see it. Harassment and or controlling behavior. It also provides potential criminal penalties to social media executives. And
go on.
Yeah, one of the hammers of this law is that if a decision maker with one of these tech companies fails to take down content per instructions in the law, they could be jailed. So in theory, Elon Musk If he were to be jettisoned to the United Kingdom or extradited to the United Kingdom, and he refused to take down online content, he could potentially be jailed. So that's never going to happen.
Right. He'll just go to Mars.
Yeah, he'll get on a SpaceX
There's no
rocket.
extradition agreement with Mars, so
he will get out of there.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty extreme law. I mean, I'm not sure if a law enacted like this in the United States would necessarily violate the First Amendment. It would certainly come close. The UK doesn't have a First Amendment. They have more latitude to restrict free speech.
Right.
Elon Musk himself is an important player in this story because he hates this law and has been criticizing it, and he's made enemies in the UK government and has accused them really without evidence of like child sex trafficking or I guess covering up evidence of child sex trafficking on the part of the elected Labour government.
I mean, that's kind of been in his playbook before. You remember there was wasn't there was a bizarre story a few years ago about something with a rescue submarine, and he was someone was trapped in a cave, and Elon accused someone of being a pedophile with no evidence, just
it's his playbook. Yeah,
he'll always slung it around. Yeah,
he'll always dial it up to an 11. It's just kind of his shock and awe strategy of everything he does in life.
Yeah.
Which I get. So what is going to happen now? Is Elon Musk really going to get arrested? What about the rest of these tech companies? What about users whose potential free speech rights are going to be violated in the United States if there's possibly subject to some type of extradition to the United Kingdom for violating the law? Interestingly, a deal could be in the offing because the United States is threatening to impose tariffs. I don't know if you've heard about this in the news.
I've heard something about that.
Yeah, not just on Canada and Mexico and China to a lesser extent, but also on the European Union and the UK. So the UK government is hoping to avoid a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel. And that could be a leverage point for negotiation on enforcement of the Online Safety Act. Trump, according to the article from Ars Technica, which is going to be in our show notes, has been hesitant to publicly push for changes to the Online Safety Act, but he has apparently been in talks with the UK government, hoping to reach some type of deal. I think maybe not Trump himself, but his team, and particularly Musk, see this law as Orwellian, and it's in Trump's interest to water down the law to the best he can, and he has this threat of tariffs as a way for him to gain some leverage. What analysts are saying, though, is that even if he does come up with a deal, it's really not going to be as drastic of a concession from the UK as people like Elon Musk would like. The UK government is not planning to offer a significant watering down of the bill as part of negotiations over tariffs. They've been even hesitant to interact with Donald Trump based on these tariff threats. It's also already the law. It's already being implemented, and they're in the process of introducing even stronger protections. So it's unclear if the threat of the tariff is enough of an incentive for the UK to drastically change this law. So I just thought it's a really interesting international story here. It certainly goes much farther than I think our Constitution would allow regulations of online speech to go. And there are certainly risks of over-enforcement for something like this, taking down politically disfavored content, and using the threat of jail time or massive fines to censor online companies. But also, somehow everything these days becomes an Elon Musk story, and I think this too has become an Elon Musk story.
So here's what I wonder. I'm trying to think of any of the major online platforms or providers that are UK-based, and I can't think of any. Can you?
I'm sure there are some, and our UK listeners are banging their heads against the wall.
Right.
But no, I don't associate any of the big tech companies we usually talk about with the United Kingdom.
So if that is the case, and that means that the big names are basically out of reach of the UK, so your Elon Musk's, your Mark Zuckerberg's, who is this really aimed at? Like, who are they? What's the next tier of people who might be UK residents that would be at risk here for not complying?
I mean, I think the biggest risk is that the platform would be taken down.
Okay.
I don't think a CEO is going to be, especially in the Trump era, is going to be extradited to the United Kingdom for the purpose of an arrest.
Right.
I'm not sure they'd even go after criminal charges anyway. It's such a drastic step.
I see.
But I think the ultimate threat is that the platform would be illegal in the app stores within the United Kingdom, the way that TikTok was supposed to be illegal in the United States, and then we just didn't do that.
Yeah.
But I think that would be the enforcement mechanism. Again, just like the TikTok incident in the United States, you faced the potential of a public backlash. There isn't as much small d democratic accountability in the United Kingdom. The parliament can basically do whatever it wants. They don't really have a system of checks and balances the way we do. UK just had an election.
I'm sorry. You said checks and balances, and I couldn't help but laughing a little bit. Go on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This is all in theory, of course.
Right.
And there's not going to be another election, a general election in the United Kingdom until probably 2029. So they're in some ways kind of insulated from this. I'm sure they don't want to become unpopular. And if they start removing popular applications in the UK, they're going to become unpopular. And sometimes it's like you don't want to get yelled at by your constituents when you're going to Harrods or trying to throw down my UK references here. That might be a little out of date.
Going to the local football match.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or maybe a cricket match.
I mean, is this a matter of having the big guns but hoping to never have to use them? Kind of a nuclear weapons kind of thing where we've upped the ante here for the things we can do to you, so don't make us do that?
Yes, in some ways, but I think there could be some edge cases where we might see some significant conflict, where there's something that in the United States we would consider free speech, but the UK might consider harassment. One thing I think of is language used towards LGBTQ people.
Oh.
That's something that used to violate the terms of service in the pre-Elon Twitter. Now there's only one word you can't say, and it's cisgender. Try typing that in on your Twitter account and see what happens.
Huh.
He's determined that is hate speech.
Okay.
But everything else you can pretty much say. So misgendering people who are trans, anti-gay bigotry, all of that is now legal on X Twitter in the United States, at least.
Yeah.
And so it's possible that the UK could seek to remove content that they consider to be harassment, but that Elon and his fans in the United States might say that's just free speech. We are politically against transition or particularly transgender rights or whatever in the United States.
Yeah.
And that it's a live policy issue and that they shouldn't be censored for it. I think that's where we're going to see the conflict. And it's just like kind of a game of chicken, who's going to fold first.
Right.
The UK will try and levy fines. Musk will resist. They'll try and take the platform down. Musk will rally his army of superfans to attack the UK government, and then we might end up at sort of a standstill. So that's kind of what I'm waiting for, is just the first major mano-a-mano battle between X-Twitter and the UK over the Online Safety Act.
I wonder to what degree are these major platforms prepared for this because of the restrictions they already have, say, in Germany. Years ago, I remember somebody sharing the tip that if on Twitter you didn't want to see any Nazis in your feed, just set your location to Germany and they disappear.
Right, because it's against the law in Germany.
Right.
I think there's certainly some overlap, but the overlap is not exhaustive. And I think when we're talking about particularly this language of harassment, that's where the gray area starts to become unclear. And things that might not count as harassment, according to the policies of the European Union, may qualify as harassment under the Online Safety Act. It kind of depends on how they choose to implement this law and where they choose to levy fines. But that seems to me to be the most likely point of conflict here.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's interesting. We'll have a link to that story in the show notes. Again, some reporting from the folks over at Ars Technica. My story this week, Ben, came in a kind of a roundabout way. I was making my way, just browsing some things on Mastodon, and the great Oren Kerr came up on my feed.
For once, you were the one who found the Oren Kerr story.
That's right. So, well-known constitutional scholar and person for which Ben is an ultimate fanboy. Oren Kerr, where is he a professor, Ben?
He's now at Stanford University.
Okay.
And just a plea, Oren, if you're listening, please come on this pod.
We'll promote your book.
We'll promote whatever
your book.
He does have a new book out.
That's right.
We will promote.
I know our producer Jen is working on it behind the scenes to try to get him to come on to promote his book. So,
and we'll ask you the softest questions to prop yourself up.
Right,
yeah,
right.
we'll do anything. Anyway, continue.
So the point of what Oren Kerr was sharing was highlighting a case in Baltimore from a few years back. This is from 2021. And it was basically a success story about surveillance. And I'll just give a little summary of what was going on here. Back in 2021, in March of 2021, there was some surveillance footage that captured a masked shooter arguing with a wheelchair-bound man outside of a little grocery store. The shooter pulled a gun from his vest pocket and killed the man in the wheelchair before fleeing with an accomplice. So detectives tracked the suspects using multiple surveillance cameras, and eventually this led them to a silver Maserati with a temporary Virginia tag. Now, side note here. If you're going to commit crimes, you drive a common car, right?
Yeah, that Maserati is going to stand out.
Right. So how many silver Maseratis with temporary Virginia tags could there possibly be in the state of Maryland?
Right. I mean, like...
One.
Yeah.
Right.
If you have a Honda Civic or something, you can really get away with it. But,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there was more footage from gas stations nearby and the University of Maryland Hospital that saw the movement of this silver Maserati before and after the crime. And so the police were able to track down a lead and they traced it to the car. But there was a witness who was able to identify the driver and name the driver, who turned out to be the witness's daughter's boyfriend. Okay.
Quite a connection.
Quite a connection. All right. But the point is, we think we found our guy. They searched the Maserati, and sure enough, this person's fingerprints are on the vehicle, and GPS data confirmed that the car was at the location of the crime scene, and additional footage from the suspect's apartment complex linked him to the vehicle and the crime. So there was an arrest warrant issued, and he was charged with first-degree murder and multiple firearm offenses, and was had a jury trial that began back in 2023. So I say all that because there was a footnote in the case files that Oren Kerr linked to that mentioned something called a Burla warrant. Said the police had used a Burla warrant. Now,
sounds like something that ChatGPT would make up, but it's actually a real thing.
So here's my question to you, Ben. Before I brought up this story, had you ever heard of a Burla warrant?
I had, just because I'd read at least a reference to the article that's mentioned in the footnote here.
Okay.
The Tesla meets the Fourth Amendment.
Okay.
I don't think I read that actual article, but like I saw a reference to that article. And learned about the Burla warrant.
So this was news to me. I had never heard of a Burla warrant. It turns out a Burla warrant refers to a company called Burla, who are a technology provider. They provide to law enforcement and the military. They only sell to those sorts of organizations. They provide forensic tools to plug into vehicles and gather all sorts of information, because modern vehicles are gathering all sorts of information and storing all sorts of information. The obvious things that we would probably think about are GPS information. Where is this vehicle? Where has it been? When has it been from place to place? But there's a lot of other stuff that gets stored.
Music tastes.
If you have your phone connected with your address book,
Yep.
all that gets stored. So you think your mobile device is locked down and encrypted, and it is, but you've shared a lot of information from your mobile device with your vehicle that the vehicle makes accessible to this sort of forensic tool. They provide hardware to be able to remove the storage devices from vehicles, to be able to then download the information into their forensic system. So being that you and I are kind of obsessed and fixated with this sort of hardware, I thought this is the kind of thing we need to talk about.
Oh, for
Right?
sure. So I think it's a really interesting tool and a really interesting case. I think Burla warrants run into two potential constitutional problems for me.
Okay.
The first is that this could be somewhat analogous to Carpenter in that you're doing potentially long-term location monitoring. So in Carpenter, it was historical cell site location information. You could see where a person had gone over a period of, I think it was 7 days in that case.
Yeah.
It's not the exact same thing because a person isn't always in their Maserati. Although if I had a Maserati, I'd probably try and just live in there
Right.
because it's
Sure.
so cool. Whereas you always have your phone in your pocket.
Right.
But at least it's similar enough that I'm wondering if any court that analyzes this would say that this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment pursuant to Carpenter, that a person should have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the whole of their movements over a long period of time, which is something that I think is at stake in this case. The other thing that comes up is the Kylo case. So seemingly an unrelated case, I believe it was 1989, 1990, something like that, where law enforcement was using infrared technology to measure heat emanating from a house.
Oh, yeah.
And it turns out a person was growing marijuana and using heat lamps, and they arrested that person who sought to suppress the evidence. And what the Supreme Court held, among other things in that case, is a person should have a reasonable expectation of privacy against the use of technology that's not generally available to the public. That's not something that most people would have, let alone know about. And I think that's particularly relevant here. I would say most people don't realize that this Burla warrant is a thing.
Right.
It is only a thing as it comes to cars, at least with updated entertainment systems.
Right.
But it is a thing.
Yeah.
And at least at this point, it's not well known enough that that might be a potential defense, that a person does have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that. This gets really circular because if Oren Kerr publishes 10 more articles about Burla warrants, and there are Supreme Court cases about Burla warrants and law review articles about Burla warrants, then people might actually have kind of constructive notice that this type of warrant exists.
Right.
But that hasn't happened yet. So I think that could potentially be a viable defense in a case like this.
Does it put your mind at ease at all? Because for me, it did. The fact that the word Burla was followed by warrant, that the police are getting warrants to execute this type of forensics.
Are they getting warrants? I guess it is a Burla warrant, right? So they do have to get judicial approval to get the warrant. Yeah, I mean that certainly makes a big difference. I feel like there's going to be some case where there's an exigency or where some law enforcement agency doesn't have the type of probable cause they need to secure a warrant, so they use an administrative subpoena, and that's when it's going to become a live issue. You're on much firmer constitutional ground if you do end up getting a warrant.
Yeah.
But the type of surveillance still exists, right? So I feel like there's going to be some case where a warrant isn't issued pursuant to probable cause, and that's where we're going to see a clash of Fourth Amendment case law and these constitutional issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. The folks over at Cyberscoop did a story on the company Burla, who, by the way, is right up the road from us. They're in Annapolis. They're a Maryland company.
Very Maryland-centric story here.
That's right. So Cyberscoop's story talked about how Burla partners with the automotive manufacturers, and in exchange for providing the automotive manufacturers with security consulting, the automotive manufacturers ensure that the data will be accessible by law enforcement. So it won't be encrypted on the device the way that, for example, Apple says the data is encrypted and so not even we can access it. The deal that Burla has with the auto manufacturers is we'll give you security consulting. Please don't make this data inaccessible.
It's frankly awesome for law enforcement across the country. I mean, you can see why this would be a very, very promising tool. Again, it's a somewhat limited universe. I drove here in a 2012 Honda Fit. I don't think you could glean much from my entertainment system.
Right.
Except maybe that my USB connection is very shaky sometimes.
That's right.
But it's going to become more ubiquitous as these entertainment systems get more sophisticated, as more people are buying. As President Trump called it, a car run on computers.
That's right.
So I do think this is going to become more of an issue. And I think it's just a fascinating issue.
I always say my favorite iPhone accessory is my car.
Totally. I mean, it's extremely useful when you're using when you connect your iPhone to the car.
The other thing I'll just add to this, in the Cyberscoop story, they had a quote from Burla's CEO. His name is Ben Lemire. He said, he was talking about the partnerships with the automotive manufacturers, and he said, "It's been kind of nice. It's been kind of a double-edged sword when we give presentations and everyone is immediately scared to death and doesn't want to plug anything into their cars ever again. But hopefully you guys aren't going to murder anybody, so it'll work out." Now, Ben is I'm going to give Ben the benefit of the doubt here and just say he's being a little flippant and he's making light of the situation. But inherent in that statement is hey, if
got nothing to hide,
right? Why do you care if we come look around at your stuff if you got nothing to hide? So
that always raises the hair on my arms.
I'm sure it does.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it does. Well, like I said, this was interesting to me. I did not know that this technology existed. So we'll have several links to this story in our show notes. We'll link to Oren Kerr's original mention of it, the story from Cyberscoop, and then a link to Burla themselves if you want to check out the company. Looks like they have some very interesting offerings, like I said, for law enforcement and the military. All right, that is my story this week. And of course, we would love to hear from you. If there's something you'd like us to consider for the show, you can email us. It's caveat@n2k.com. Looking for a career where innovation meets impact? Vanguard's technology team is shaping the future of financial services by solving complex challenges with cutting-edge solutions. Whether you're passionate about AI, cybersecurity, or cloud computing, Vanguard offers a dynamic and collaborative environment where your ideas drive change. With career growth opportunities and a focus on work-life balance, you'll have the flexibility to thrive both professionally and personally. Explore open cybersecurity and technology roles today at vanguardjobs.com. Ben, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with David Weissman. He is the Vice President of Secure Communications at BlackBerry. And we were talking about some of CISA's encrypted communications guidelines and techniques to make that actionable. Here's my conversation with David Weissman.
I think there's two sets of guidelines, and they're both actually pretty pragmatic. So the first is for telecom carriers, networking equipment organizations, and the second is more for the general public. So maybe we kind of focus on that second one for a moment.
Sure.
And what they've really done is summarize, the the risk of salt typhoon, which is, any typical phone call that you make, any use of SMS, whether for communicating with someone or using it as a tool to validate identity, is at risk at this point in time. So they recommend that people move to encrypted applications, end-to-end encryption. For the general public, they recommend using some of the popular free applications that people are aware of, things like Signal, WhatsApp, those types of things. And then they also give guidance on what are some basic security configuration settings you should put on your phone, whether you have an iOS phone or an Android phone. And so I think what they provided is very consumable for the most part. There's some areas getting into authentication that maybe you probably need a bit more of a tech background to really understand what they're talking about. But for the most part, they're providing solid advice that I think the typical person on the street can take advantage of.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to dig in with you a little bit on. I mean, from your perspective, um, how how achievable is this for folks who are, just going about their lives trying to keep their messaging private? Are these apps within their reach?
I think if we look at it from just an individual keeping their data private, and by their data, because we need to talk about this more in a moment, I really mean what they're saying to people, what they're sharing. I think it's within reach. I think the vast majority of people, or if they're already doing texting, they can use a messaging app. And I think by doing that, that they are increasing their own levels of privacy for their information. But at the same time, they need to be aware of, it's a public system. Anyone can sign up. You still need to really think about, how do I know for sure who I'm talking to? Is that really the right person? You still have that risk. You had that risk before. And also, it's free. So what's the cost? Well, the cost is you're giving up control over your communications metadata, who you're communicating with, different sets of information about yourself. Even though they're protecting what you're actually saying, there's a lot of information around that.
How do you recommend that folks go about choosing what app they want to use here? I mean, I think for a lot of folks who are coming from just regular text messaging, SMS messaging on their phone, which is sort of effortlessly cross-platform and interoperable, not all of these platforms talk to each other.
For the most part, they don't. That's starting to evolve. There's some new regulations coming out of the EU that are, pushing these applications once they reach a certain size to that they have to support interconnectivity between the platforms. But that's a new emerging area. It's I think it's going to still take a few years to see how that plays out. But I think for most people, the answer to the question is, which one should I use? Is which one are their family members and their friends already using? And I think the other thing to think about is you probably want to segregate what you might use for business from what you might want to use personally, just as a good data hygiene technique. To one, just keep yourself from accidentally sending things to the wrong people, but also keeping your business information, your company information separate from your personal information is just a good practice in general.
Yeah. How about people protecting themselves from things like identity spoofing, deep fakes, things like that? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, there's some in the CISA guide that really have to do with authentication techniques and using things like hardware devices and things. And that's the part of the advice that I think the vast majority of people are going to find difficult to act on. Now, the part of it is, hey, don't use just a simple text message for authentication. So there are, I think people are becoming more comfortable with authentication apps where you scan the QR code, you get a two-factor authentication. But a lot of times that's driven by, it's not necessarily the consumer's choice, that's driven by the website or the application they're using. But that's still the biggest risk, I think, that people are still exposed to. The end-to-end encryption does a lot to protect the privacy of your data, but the more people start to use these applications, the more exposed they're going to be to spoofing attacks. I think, even if you use popular apps today, you get messages that says, "Hey, I found your number in my book. Who are you again?" Or something along those lines. Those happen even in these encrypted applications. So that's a risk. And then the other risk is, particularly with the Salt Typhoon and the information that's already been exposed, when you use AI techniques, it's now going to be, even going forward, it's going to be easier for these to be very compelling. And what I mean by that is, if you want to target a particular person, the data is available to identify what are their communication patterns. Who do they typically message? What time of day might they message these people? And if you're trying to do an attack based on that, if you mimic those patterns, the person's going to be much more open to accepting that I'm really talking to who I think I'm talking with. And then you layer on the next level of that, which is, since the Salt Typhoon was able to actually read SMS messages, actually listen in to voice calls, that data is there forever now. And people don't really typically change their phone numbers. If you have someone's number, it's probably going to be good for a decade or more.
Right.
And so, since the data was already there, the AI models can take that and not just when you engage and who you engage with, but the tone of your message. That how do you text, right? Or your voice that sounds like you if you leave a message, and all of these things mean that people are just going to have to be much more skeptical if anything seems off at all, that they're communicating with who they think they are, and that's something the advice of moving to an encrypted commercial app doesn't really help with.
I wonder too, if we need some sort of a buddy system here, particularly I think about my own, elderly parents and how much they rely on me and my siblings and their friends to just check in with on these things. Hey, does this seem real? Is this a bill I need to pay? Is this a message I should return? Those sorts of things. It seems to me like you're much better off not trying to go at this alone.
Definitely, and unfortunately, elderly people with certain disabilities are more susceptible, I think, to these type of attacks, and a lot of times they're targeted for financial crime, particularly. You read of cases, hey, your kid's in the hospital, they were in a really bad crash, you need to send some money right away so the doctor can take care of them.
Yeah. Where do you suppose we're headed here? I mean, this is always a game of cat and mouse, right? The good guys adjust and the bad guys pivot in reaction to that. People embracing encryption here. How do you suppose we might see the bad guys adjust to that?
I think they're going to double down on two areas. One is the spoofing and the smishing and all these types of identity attacks. And in fact, that's been the most popular technique to date, but now it can be even more effective with some of these new attack tools that are being done and the data from those and how it can be generated. But second of all, I think the focus on harvesting the metadata around the communications and using that for, 'cause if you think about a lot of these popular messaging tools, they know a lot about you. And now there's whole new sets of area beyond just the telecom carriers that can be mined for that information. And with that information, I think they're going to come up with new creative ways to, whether it's to extract information, extract money or whatever their goals are from people. So as you mentioned, it's kind of cat and mouse, but I think maybe the focus of it changes a bit to, okay, they know we're in the carrier networks. Now let's go to these other platforms and see if we can attack those platforms.
As we head into this new year and we're getting a new presidential administration coming in, do you expect there to be any big changes when it comes to these sort of things with the second round of a Trump presidency?
I think that some of the work, for example, CISA is doing in the U.S. is fairly independent of the administration. I mean, this is practical type of advice that, I don't think it becomes a very political topic per se. So in that aspect, no. But the other aspect of it is I do get a sense that from a big tech, a social media perspective, that the incoming administration has a different viewpoint on how those should be regulated. What rights they might have to the information. There might be changes to opt-in policies around data protections. So I think it's going to be more how the oversight of the actual media companies, the social media companies, the communication companies, that's going to change more than the advice that it's being given to the general public and how to protect themselves.
So interesting conversation, huh, Benton?
I think it was a really interesting conversation. One thing I thought was particularly interesting is how so much of this is about future expectations and methodologies of threat actors.
Yeah.
So understanding what our enemy's next move is going to be, and then making our defenses agile against those potential threats. So I thought that aspect was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, again, our thanks to David Weissman from BlackBerry for joining us. We do appreciate him taking the time. Hey everybody, Dave here. Have you ever wondered where your personal information is lurking online? Like many of you, I was concerned about my data being sold by data brokers. So I decided to try Delete Me. I have to say, Delete Me is a game changer. Within days of signing up, they started removing my personal information from hundreds of data brokers. I finally have peace of mind knowing my data privacy is protected. Delete Me's team does all the work for you with detailed reports, so you know exactly what's been done. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and enter code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We want to thank all of you for listening. Our executive producer is Jennifer Eiben. The show is edited by Trey Hester. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.